so far you know 3 ways to solve quadratic equations algebraically. Today we're going to look at which method is the best. So the way you solve a quadratic equation is going to be based a lot on the form that you have. So you may have a factored form equation, a standard form equation, or a vertex form equation. Each form has a way that's a little bit easier to use with that form, but you do have some choices also. If you have a factored form equation, then most likely you're going to solve it by factoring. If you have a standard form equation, you have 2 options. You could either use your quadratic formula, or you could convert it into factored form and then solve it by factoring. And then finally, vertex form, you could either solve it using your square root method, or you could convert it to standard form and again solve it using your quadratic formula. So let's look at a couple of examples. Here we have a standard form equation. So one of our options for the standard form equation is going to be to solve it by factoring. So when you solve by factoring, this is when we use our box method. You got to find your factors of -24. Remember, you multiply your a times your c values, and they need to add up to your middle term. So once you have your box completed, our factored form is 2x minus 4 times x plus 3. Remember, this all equals 0. You take each factor, make it equal to 0, and then solve the 2 separate equations. Now another way to solve a standard form equation is using your quadratic formula. You start off identifying your a, b, and c values, writing down your formula, and then you're going to plug everything in. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Your next step is going to be to calculate what's under your square root symbol. In this case it's 100, so we have -2 plus or minus the square root of 100 divided by 4. When we do that, we get -2 plus or minus 10 divided by 4. And remember, at this step, we have to solve our 2 equations, the -2 plus 10 or the -2 minus 10. And you can see once you get down here that the 2 solutions you have using your quadratic formula are the same as the solutions you have using your factored form. Now, ways that will help you decide which of these 2 methods to use. Quadratic formula will always work for every standard form equation. And it's good to use in every situation because you don't know if you're going to be able to factor it. You don't know if your factors are going to be whole numbers or decimals. Remember, you can't factor something if the factors down here aren't whole numbers. Okay. Also, remember, sometimes when we used our quadratic formula, we got a square root here that was not a perfect square. That's another situation that we wouldn't be able to factor. So standard form, most of the time you're going to use your quadratic formula unless you're either really comfortable with factoring or the equation is pretty straightforward and easy to factor. So the other method that we're going to talk about is if we have a vertex form equation. Now when you have vertex form, the easiest method for you to use is your square root method. Okay? In order to use your square root method, remember you have to have a quantity that's squared because the square root and the squared are going to cancel each other out. So when you use your square root method, you start off, remember, you need to get all the value other than the squared value on the other side of your equation. So we're going to add 4 to both sides here, and we're going to be left with x minus 5 squared equals 4. So here we want to cancel out the squared, and we're going to do that by taking the square root of both sides. When we take the square root of both sides, that square root and that square cancel out, and we're going to be left with x minus 5 equals plus or minus 2. Because remember, the square root of 4 is 2, positive 2, and negative 2. And then from here, we're going to take this and we're going to write 2 equations, one for our positive 2 value and one for our negative 2 value, and then we solve each of those equations. Now the other option you have with vertex form is to take that vertex form and convert it into standard form. Okay? This is something we haven't done for a while. So just to refresh your memory on that, we use our box method. You're going to take the squared value, it goes around the outside of your box. This -4 goes bottom right, and then you fill in your box, and you get your x squared plus, minus your 10x here, and you combine these 2 terms to get your plus 21. Once you have your standard form equation, the quadratic formula is the same. You take your a, b, and c values, your formula, you make all your substitutions, find out what you have under your square root value. Take the square root of 16 here. You get 10 plus or minus 4 divided by 2, and you do your two solutions. Okay, so again, vertex form, the easiest way to solve it is using your square root method, but you do always have the option of converting to standard form and using your quadratic formula.